Welcome to NFL Nexus, your absolute go-to hub for understanding the deep, often hidden mechanics of professional football. Before we jump into today's deeply fascinating explainer, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's topic. Also, if you want to support the channel in a really fun way, check out our highly requested coloring books. They are absolutely perfect for children, they make amazing gifts for your grandchildren, and honestly, we have intricately designed editions for adults as well. It's a fantastic way to unwind. You can grab them right now by clicking the link down in the description, or just by scanning the QR code you see right there. All right, let's dive into it. Today, we are unpacking a side of professional football that is incredibly fascinating, but honestly, it's also somewhat ruthless. We are talking about the sheer, unfeeling, totally objective mathematics of NFL roster construction. And to really bring this to life, we're going to look at this through the lens of a player who literally just won the biggest game on earth. Over the course of this explainer, we are going to dive deep into the absolute minutia of NFL team building. We'll be closely examining 5 key areas to really understand how this machine works. First, the Super Bowl illusion. Second, the roster math. Third, the reserve/future reality. Fourth, grading Seattle's draft. And finally, efficiency over loyalty. To really anchor these concepts and make them concrete, we're going to use the recent release of veteran running back Cam Akers by the Seattle Seahawks as our primary case study. It is a perfect, albeit completely brutal, real-world example of exactly how the modern NFL operates. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the Super Bowl illusion. So what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, consider the sheer irony here. And ask yourself, what is a Super Bowl ring actually worth when April rolls around? We really need to spend some time pondering this disconnect. Back in February of 2026, Cam Akers was standing right there in the confetti. He was officially a Super Bowl LX champion. The Seahawks specifically went out of their way to activate him for the biggest game in all of sports, totally leaning on his championship pedigree. He was in uniform, under the absolute brightest lights imaginable, soaking it all in. Yet, how in the world does an elevation to that grandest stage in February translate to absolutely zero job security just 11 short weeks later? It's mind-boggling. From a fan's perspective, winning a ring means you are part of the family forever. You're a legend in that city. But from a general manager's perspective, a ring won in February does absolutely nothing to clear a roster spot in April. We are looking at a truly devastating disconnect here between glory and business. On one side of the ledger, you have the ultimate football achievement, the pinnacle of the sport, Super Bowl LX champion. On the exact opposite side, you have the incredibly harsh, unfeeling reality of late April, released to free up roster space. That was it. That was the official, cold, one-sentence statement released by the Seahawks. There was no heartfelt tribute video posted on social media. There was absolutely no thank you press conference honoring a 2-time NFL champion. It was just basic, inescapable arithmetic. The Seahawks had literally just drafted 8 new players over the weekend. They were legally obligated to get the roster down to 82 players. Akers was kept on the payroll just long enough for the draft to render him completely and utterly unnecessary. Think about that. He had 2 championship rings on his fingers and a pink slip sitting in his inbox before the calendar even turned to May. Let's really dig into Akers' medical history for a second, because it paints an incredible, almost unbelievable picture of human resilience, a resilience that the team's spreadsheet simply ignored. He enters the league in 2020. By 2021, tragedy strikes. He suffers his first Achilles tear. Now, the standard recovery timeline for a running back, a position that relies entirely on explosive cutting, with a torn Achilles is 9 to 12 grueling months. Akers miraculously returned to the field in roughly 6 months and went on to win Super Bowl LVI with the Rams. Just an incredible feat. Then, the completely unthinkable happens. In 2023, while playing for the Vikings, he tears the other Achilles. Most guys are done right there, career over. But he comes back again. He plays for the Texans, eventually lands in Seattle, and secures a second championship in February 2026. He literally survived 2 career-threatening injuries that would have retired 99% of professional athletes. But surviving the math of draft weekend, that proved to be mathematically impossible. The sheer, undeniable human effort required to overcome those twin injuries meant absolutely nothing to the salary cap. Okay. Now let's pivot away from the emotional side of the game and meticulously break down the clinical, front office calculus that forces a general manager to make these exact kinds of brutal cuts. This brings us to Section 2, the roster math. This is where the business side gets really clear. Let's closely analyze Seattle's running back room. They currently have 6 running backs under contract. First, you have Zach Charbonnet. He's a former second-round investment who is essentially penned in as the presumptive lead back, and crucially, they are keeping him there even though he is currently rehabbing an ACL tear from January. Second-round picks buy you that kind of patience. Then you have Jadarian Price. He was freshly drafted at number 32 overall. He has fully guaranteed first-round money. Because of that investment, he is absolutely locked into a featured role, regardless of how training camp goes. Then you drop down a tier to Kenny McIntosh and George Halani. They occupy those critical short yardage and rotational spots. And it's really important to remember here, it was George Halani's injury back in November that even created the tiny temporary window for Akers to be signed to the practice squad in the first place. Finally, you have Jacardia Wright and Emmanuel Wilson. They're your young, very cheap camp bodies who offer significant special teams value. So look at that. That is 6 names, 6 highly specific, contractually protected roles. Mathematically, there was precisely 0 room left for a 7th body carrying a veteran's medical history. I really want you to take a long, hard look at the number 257. This is not just some random piece of trivia. This is the exact number of brand new draft contracts that were created league-wide over the course of draft weekend. This is exactly why the Cam Akers situation wasn't just some isolated incident specific to Seattle. Across all 32 NFL teams, 257 highly valued, organizationally protected rookies suddenly needed lockers on Monday morning. And when those 257 rookies walk through the facility doors, practice squad veterans are immediately pushed right out the back door. Every single team in the league that relied on practice squad depth to patch up their roster for a playoff run faces the exact same cold, calculated equation that Seattle executed here. To truly understand why a proven 2-time champion was the very first guy to go, it is absolutely crucial that we dig into the fine print. Let's move to Section 3, the reserve/future reality. We have to unpack the specific legalese that basically dictates how the NFL operates in the month of April. What exactly is a reserve/future contract? Well, essentially, it is a handshake with a massive neon-flashing disclaimer attached to it. It's a zero-risk, non-guaranteed off-season agreement, and it can only be signed by players who were not on an active 53-man roster when the previous season ended. That means there is absolutely 0 signing bonus. There is 0 guaranteed money. The team retains the absolute full right to release the player at any second before the new season starts without a single penalty. Think about the wild trajectory here. Cam Akers entered the league as the number 52 overall draft pick, carrying a rookie deal worth roughly $6.17 million. Fast forward to today, and by the end of this championship run, he was literally fighting for practice squad minimums on a paper-thin deal that offered him 0 offseason protection. You know, the NFL's Super Bowl elevation rulebook is genuinely fascinating when you break it down. The current rules allow a team to elevate up to 2 practice squad players for any given game day, and yes, that fully includes the Super Bowl, without having to permanently add them to the 53-man active roster. So it's a 3-step process. Step 1, you get elevated to the active roster for the weekend. Step 2, you suit up and play in literally the biggest game of your entire life. Step 3, the very morning after the Super Bowl, you immediately revert right back to the practice squad. It's like Cinderella at midnight. Suiting up for the big game carries absolutely 0 contractual weight the very next day. It leaves players like Akers and, hey, his teammate Vallis Jones Jr., who is also elevated for the game, completely 100% vulnerable the very moment the NFL draft begins. Now, when we strip away the Super Bowl glow and look at Akers' actual regular season production for Seattle in 2025, the front office's logic becomes incredibly clear. Let's look at the stats. 3 games, 2 kick returns, 54 total yards. That's it. That was his entire body of work for the franchise before the Super Bowl run. We absolutely have to emphasize how this incredibly small sample size played into the general manager's decision-making process. Because he only had 54 total yards on special teams back in December, the Seahawks quite literally viewed him merely as a tactical emergency patch. He was a temporary Band-Aid for an injured running back room that needed a warm body. He was never, ever viewed as a permanent fixture they intended to build their future around. So yes, the Super Bowl ring he earned was incredibly real, but the roster spot he occupied, that was entirely borrowed. To truly grasp the overwhelming pressure that pushed Akers out the door so quickly, we must deeply analyze the overarching strategy behind the Seahawks' brand new 2026 draft class. Let's head into Section 4, grading Seattle's draft. Looking at Seattle's only 2 post-Super Bowl draft classes in the entire history of the franchise reveals a massive, undeniable shift in front office urgency. Let's go back to 2014. Coming off that championship, they had 9 picks, but crucially, they had absolutely no day 1 selection. Their best pick from that entire class ended up being Justin Britt in the second round, who developed into a solid offensive lineman. But overall, they heavily relied on late-round flyers, guys like Cassius Marsh, who eventually found some success playing elsewhere. Now, fast forward and look at 2026. The urgency in the building is entirely different. They wheeled and dealed to double their initial 4 picks up to 8 total selections through trades, and they aggressively, intentionally targeted immediate, glaring roster needs right from the very first round. This strategic shift from the front office is incredibly clear when you compare the 2 off-seasons. Back in 2014, one of the biggest, most criticized deficiencies of their draft class was a total lack of early defensive backs. They didn't draft anyone to develop behind the legendary Legion of Boom, and it really hurt their depth in subsequent seasons. General manager John Schneider clearly learned a tough lesson from that era, because in 2026, he masterfully manipulated the draft board to acquire premium talent immediately. He grabbed guys like safety Bud Clark in the second round, cornerback Julian Neal in the third, and Andre Fuller in the 7th. Schneider drafted aggressively to fill immediate holes across the entire defense and the running back room. And in doing so, he created the exact immediate roster crunch that mathematically cost Kim Akers his job. Let's bring all of these microscopic details, the specific contracts, the draft pick investments, the brutal injury timelines. Let's bring them all together to explain the stark, overarching philosophy of today's game. This is Section 5, Efficiency over Loyalty. I really want to just linger on this profound truth for a moment, because it explains so much of what we see in the offseason. Loyalty and efficiency aren't competing values in the modern NFL. Efficiency won that argument years ago. As fans watching at home, we naturally assume a guy with 2 Super Bowl rings, a guy who literally defied medical science to recover from 2 separate Achilles tears, had surely earned some level of loyalty from the franchise. But inside those front offices, a rookie's guaranteed draft capital will always override a veteran's incredible survival story. Jadarian Price's first-round status created a non-negotiable financial commitment for the organization. Akers' championship pedigree? Well, that merely created a really nice temporary story for the team's website. So the big question is, what happens to Cam Akers right now? The veteran running back market is incredibly brutal in a normal year. We all know that. But carrying 2 Achilles scars makes it exponentially harder to find a willing buyer. If we thoroughly analyze his absolute best-case scenario right now, it is realistically just a training camp invite on a prove-it deal with no guarantees. The most logical landing spots are highly specific. First, teams desperately needing a veteran RB2, ideally a team running a familiar outside zone blocking scheme exactly like the one he ran so successfully with the Rams. Second, a team with a rookie starter who desperately needs a veteran sounding board to mentor him in the locker room. And finally, a franchise suffering an untimely, tragic ACL injury in training camp, much like Seattle did back in January, might call him to be that emergency patch once again. But make no mistake, if the phone rings, the call will be to solve a sudden temporary problem, not to build a franchise around him. And that brings us to the incredibly harsh reality we want to leave you to ponder today. Did Seattle make the right, coldly calculated call by choosing the financial efficiency of a rookie over the proven experience of a 2-time champion? Or, in releasing a guy like Cam Akers so casually, did they just hand a highly motivated survivor and potentially a division rival a massive, completely free vindication story just waiting to unfold this fall? It is a truly fascinating question about the brutal, unforgiving business of football. Let us know exactly what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to NFL Nexus, hit the like button, and please check out the link in the description or scan the QR code to pick up one of our amazing coloring books for yourself, your kids, or your grandkids. It really helps support The Explainer. We will see you next time.